Welcome to Straight Talk with Billy Kay. I'm Billy Keyserling, the mayor of Beaufort, the man who has the privilege of serving as the mayor of the best hometown in the world. Part of a mayor's job is to lead a civil discussion, conversation about the future of Beaufort. Some say, I say to school children that being mayor is like a bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. But as we move on that journey, we have to talk. We also need for the citizens to understand without having to come to every meeting what the city does. So today we're going to talk about economic development and a very unique piece of economic development. I have as my guest retired Marine Corps Master Sergeant Dwight Hora, who is working for an organization called TWEAC, T-W-E-A-C, Transition Workforce Education Assistance Collaboration. When we first started the economic development push, we've always relied on the county or a regional approach, and we still work with the county, we still work with the region, but in our effort to grow Beaufort in the right way so that we don't become any place USA, we realized that there have been many unfilled promises to the young people here, and that is to create better jobs than their parents had so they can live a little bit better than the way they grew up. The first step, though it was a bit controversial, was to purchase the industrial or the Commerce Park right across from Marine Corps Air Station because the State Department of Commerce that generates leads for businesses that want to come to our state, expand in our state, move in our state, insists that you have dirt on which to put people. But we realized that once we had the dirt, we had to deal with the question of workforce. And workforce has been an issue for many years in Beaufort, but also all over South Carolina. A very big disappointment to BMW up in Greer, South Carolina, when they had to recruit their inaugural workforce from Germany because they couldn't transition men and women working in textile mills into automobile manufacturing quickly enough. And our eyes were opened. Kim Statler, who's the director of the Low Country Economic Alliance, said, what about the 2,000 plus or minus Marines and sailors who are drug-free? They grew up in an earn and learn environment. They've served their country. They have focus. They have discipline. But many of them aren't getting jobs. And they potentially have the skills and the ability to be trained for these jobs. But there's a disconnect between the traditional transition out of the military and into industry. That's actually how I met Dwight. Why don't you tell us, Dwight, a little bit about you?
I served 22 years in the Marine Corps. I retired here about 1.5 years ago.
Still talk like a Marine, don't you?
Yeah, sort of.
Always a Marine, right?
Once a Marine, always a Marine. I've been in and out of Beaufort now since '91. When I first got here as a 19-year-old PFC, I fell in love with the place. The Marine Corps took me away for a while. They brought me back. They sent me away, and then I figured out how to get back here. I enjoy Beaufort. I like the weather. I like the people, and I like the environment. One of the things that I got interested in is when I heard that TWEAC was looking for somebody who was wanting to get involved and engaged in a workforce planning and building program specifically for the military, I made sure they knew who I was. Because it's a passion of mine, because I've served in the Marine Corps for so long. I love what the Marine Corps has, I love what the military has, and I think there's a lot of potential. It's just not completely received. The communication difference between the military and the civilian world is different. The guys getting out of the military, they're disciplined, they're loyal, they have a lot of different skills because of the multiple tasks that they have to perform, and they also have a lot of specific skill sets that industry is looking for.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to break in for 1 second to tell the audience a story which I think will make what you're doing seem that much more important. And that is, I was talking with a general, General Runnels at Parris Island, who's in charge of East Coast recruiting and training. And she said that it was just so disappointing to her staff, and to her colleagues in the other branches of service to see these young men and women who come in for 4 years or 8 years. They serve their country. They go through deployments. They're in harm's way, and they come back without much direction. And the easy route for them is to go home to their bed in Ohio or Michigan or South Carolina for that matter, eat their mother's cooking, use the post 9/11 GI Bill to enroll a couple of courses in a community college, use their $1,200 a month stipend to buy beer and collect unemployment. And the reality is they've been through this intense training, this wonderful collegial experience, bringing skills, trained at the government expense, certainly paid the government back multi-times over for their service. But after that 3-year period, they sort of get lost. And so what drove us to realize this was to create this TWEAC, which is a nonprofit organization. I first met Dwight when he was telling me want to come to the kickoff because he was taking a cross-country ride on his motorcycle to raise money for disabled veterans?
Homeless veterans.
For homeless veterans. And how far did you ride?
Over 9,000 miles in 40 days.
9,000 miles, 40 days. And how much did you raise?
$33,000.
It struck me this is the kind of guy who might fit very well with TWEAC. He didn't say this, but part of his active duty, he was a recruiter. So he served between a bridge between the military and the civilian population. And that's a lot of what he is doing today. So I thought that little story would give people a sense of what the challenge is, but also what the opportunity is.
The opportunities are great. The one thing TWEAC has pinpointed, though, is with all the support that the civilian community is giving to veterans today, they're missing one aspect. The individual who's engaged in the military member who's departing and the private industry in the civilian world. There's a lot of support, a lot of websites, there's a lot of things going on, but there's not much engagement directly between the two. And I'm glad that TWEAC has recognized that I have something to offer for that engagement.
Mm-hmm. We're going to come back to what your day looks like and what you do, but TWEAC, our board is comprised of, it's a nonprofit, it's not the city. The city is supportive of it, but it's really sort of headed now by the Low Country Economic Alliance. But it has its own board. General Gary Parks, 3-star retired Marine, is the chair. Terry Maud, who is the widow of the former head of manpower for the Army, works on it. And Terry actually has done thousands of internet searches and found there's nothing out there that is like this. It's all mechanical, it's all driven. I went through one of the transition programs, not the whole program, but I went and visited the transition program to see that there's this incredible disconnect between industry that needs workers and young individuals who have skills but who might not be able to articulate those skills in a way that industry can understand them, and industry may not be able to articulate its needs or its programs or its compensation in a way that some of these young people can't. We've got about a minute and a half in this segment. We'll be back after that. But why don't we talk a little bit in that segment about the disconnect, and then we'll get to what you do every day.
Okay, the disconnect is, it's got to do with communication on both ends. The military members are departing, they have a certain speak, a certain way about their demeanor, a certain way of writing. The civilian world has a different way of writing, acting, all of that. It doesn't mean that they cannot mesh, because they can, but it's just different. And if you only write it down on paper and submit a piece of paper to somebody with a different way of communicating, majority of the time the resume is going to be put in the circular file. It's my hope and my desire in this position to become that engaged individual, to help communicate the differences between the two.
Okay. We're going to take a break, but we'll be back in just a minute, and then we're going to get into what your day is like and the challenges and the opportunities that we all see for engaging and harnessing the retired military as a workforce to help us bring a more diverse economic base to Beaufort, so that we can grow the right way. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Straight Talk with Billy Kay. For those just joining us, I have retired Marine Corps Master Sergeant Dwight Hora, who is working as the military liaison with a small new nonprofit organization called Transition Workforce Education Assistance Collaboration, better known as TWEAC. We got a system of transitioning military into the private sector that's not working, and this group in Beaufort is basically creating a national model to deal with a national issue. I heard an interesting story not long ago. Dwight is out actually being a bridge between industry and people coming out of, matriculating out of the Marine Corps and the Navy. And he hears stories too, but the story I heard was that some young man who was being interviewed by a company was, one of the first questions was if he had been deployed during his term in the military, if he had been in a war zone. And the minute he answered that question, yes, I have, all of a sudden the interview died. Clearly there's a concern by industry, and it may be a rightful concern. It's certainly a concern we have that needs to be addressed because we don't want someone's service to their country abroad to be the thing that becomes a stumbling block into them getting a job. Correct. You had this experience, and you had mentioned that you'd read about it as well.
I have not had the experience, but recently in the Marine Corps Times, there was a write-up about, I can't remember the exact percentage, but there was a big percentage of industry who's being very cautious about this. I believe the reason is because it has been publicized so much over the last 10 to 11 years, through the media and through people talking and through the VA and other institutions, that business has the right to be cautious. But I think it's a disability alone. It's just like any other disability if the individuals have it. And I think there's a misconception on, okay, you've been claimed with PTSD, but does that really mean that you're unstable at any point?
Right. You know, my father, if he was still alive, would shoot me for saying this, but my father was a young Navy doctor during World War II, and not long after he was in the military, they took off his Navy uniform and they put on a Marine Corps uniform, and he landed with no combat training. He landed with the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal, and he came back from that incredibly horrible, horrific situation for the Americans, and they didn't call it PTSD, but he was shaken by the experience. Yet he managed to lead a very productive life, be a country doctor in one of our community's most celebrated, generous, kind, giving, 24/7 available to people. So the answer probably, or the problem, is not necessarily that they suffered PTSD, it's did they get the support they needed for the transition back home? Was PTSD something they brought with them, the potential? Was there, a firecracker that was going to be lit by some, I believe it is, actually, there's a firecracker in there that something's going to light, some sort of traumatic experience, automobile wreck, loss of a parent. So these people aren't abnormal, they're human beings, and when you go through traumas, you react certain ways. But we are very aware of that, and you and I haven't talked about this very long. I have to note that Dwight's the first of what will probably be 3 employees, one of whom will be a part-time social worker who would actually work with everyone, whether or not they were ever diagnosed or not, that say, this is going to be an issue that you need to address. So what's the story, and how do you use the issue when it's raised to create opportunities for yourself rather than to let someone build a wall? Because there are many stories of courage and dignity and focus that people do get from that transition out. Dwight, tell us a little bit. You're just part-time, you're working on a contract, we have a small grant, we're waiting. The odd thing is the Secretary of Commerce, the head of the State Department of Employment Workforce, the general manager at Boeing, everyone we've spoken to thinks it's a great program. But because it's not something people have done before, it's changed, it's a new way of looking at it, we've had trouble with funding. So the Low Country Alliance gave us a seed grant. We're waiting now for larger funding. So Dwight's our lone soldier, but he's out there most days talking to people. Tell us what a typical day is like, who you've met with, not by name, but who you've met with.
A typical day consists of working with Kim Statler and Jessica to communicate with businesses in the Low Country area. I also get to know and have had many phone calls from veterans who either are getting out soon or recently gotten out, who are interested in receiving some help. I meet with them, I find out what their backgrounds are, what they're good at, what their goals are, and are they planning on staying in this area or going home. I hope to encourage them to stay in this area just because it's a nice place. But I work with them to try to get them engaged in certain areas, in certain arenas. It's kind of like a career counselor. So I work with them because I understand them. I look at their resumes and I say, okay, this needs to be changed because you're talking military and the civilian world's not going to understand it. But I also engage the businesses so that I can contact them and hopefully let them know that you have an applicant. Here's his background. Here's his situation. I ask that you just look at his resume, see what his background is, and have a little faith that because they're service members, they may not have the exact degree or certifications, but I know that they've got the skill sets that you're looking for.
You know, Gary Parks, General Parks, as I said earlier, 3-star Marine Corps general, retired, had his first job interview after he left the Marine Corps and didn't know how to write a resume. Yet, what could the man do? I spent a couple of hours a month or so ago with a young man from Beaufort, served the Navy 26 years, was coming out as a WO Warrant Officer 4, which I take as at the senior level of enlistment. And I said, what can you do? If I were to try to help you, place you with industry. He said, I fix things. I said, what do you mean you fix things? What do you fix? He said, well, if my commanding officer tells me I need to move 100 people from one city to another city, or I need to arrange for this to happen or that to happen, or I need to create a meeting among city officials and military officials, or if I have to get the people in the uniform supply to get off their tails and have a larger inventory. I said, so that's what you call fixing things. I said, in the corporate world, they would call that logistics. And if you go look at one of the biggest needs that companies have as they're spread all over the world, they have multiple plants, it's people who can figure out how to get from one place to another. Right. So I said, when you go for your interview, tell them you're a logistics expert. I promise you, you will know as much as anyone who's doing logistics for that company. Mm-hmm. It may be a different substance, it may be a different subject. So this is what you're talking about when you talk about getting people to speak the same kind of language, I believe.
Yes, it's just basically breaking down the communication between the military and the civilian world. One thing that the military has is they understand training. They understand logistics. They understand moving from point A to point B. They also have a ton of soft skills that really isn't found much in the civilian world, like loyalty, discipline, ensuring that they take care of the job before they actually leave work for the day. Those you can't teach people in the civilian world, or you have a hard time finding that from the high schools. But in the military, it's embedded in them because of the expectations of what they have to go through.
Well, we're a Marine Corps town. We're also a Navy town. And from the city's point of view, and I think I speak for the county, the Low Country Economic Alliance, and the broader community, I think we have an obligation, but more importantly, this challenge creates an opportunity for Beaufort to grow the right way. During this 2 years that I've been querying this subject and traveling and meeting with people, I met with an Army general who is in charge of transitioning. And he was very excited about the Army's new program. And while I don't want to draw a contrast between the Marine Corps or the Army or what we're doing and what he's doing, it's only fair to say that what the Army has rolled out is something that's very similar to Match.com. What we're rolling out is saying, here's a guy who served his country. wants to live in this community, has a certain skill set, can be a contributing member of society. Dwight, I'm very excited to be working with you. I think we'll be talking about TWEAC, transitioning, military, economic development, job diversification over the next year. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us with Straight Talk with Billy Kay.